Good morning or afternoon or evening or wherever you are, hello to you. We're going to do another fail focus, and today we're going to be looking at Reem's fail focus. Now, this was Reem's first attempt, and Reem has been very patient waiting her turn for a fail focus. I'm very grateful for your patience, Reem. I hope that this brings you some help, and I hope that this also supports the rest of you going forward in your own journeys. Today we're going to look at, as we have done before, Reem's feedback in her own words. We're going to look at the examiner's feedback. We're also going to look at the scores provided, mainly looking for zeros, ones, and we're also going to take a separate look at the risk management, as we always do, because as we know, that is a separate entity in and of itself. And then I'm going to try and offer you some contributions and supports and some ideas going forwards on what we could perhaps have done differently and could do differently going ahead. So, let's start with Reem's feedback. So, Reem says, all started well, met the examiner, got in the car, repeated the plan, and recapped with the pupil well. The original plan was meeting situations and clearance. The pupil wanted to be prompted, so off we went. Reem says she prompted the pupil on different meeting and clearance situations. All of that was going well, but then we got stuck in some traffic. But we didn't sit in silence because we had a conversation about different scenarios, potential hazards, and how we'd react to them. I like that, Reem. I'm really happy about that. Anytime you guys are sat in traffic or sat in roadworks or sat in a situation where you can't be doing the thing you want to be doing, if you're fearful of silence, you can always talk about what-if scenarios. You can always talk about what you're planning to go and do and recap and recoach on what you're going to do when you get there. And you can, there's all sorts of things that you can still be doing whilst you're sat in that situation, okay? Whether it's to do with your original plan or something else that you're building upon while you're sat there. So I'm pleased, Reem, that you have taken that opportunity, rather. So Reem then says, we approached a big crossroad going ahead, but the pupil got confused with the lanes, so we ended up straddling two lanes. I pointed it out, told the pupil that we'd pull up and discuss. That's what we did. We talked about the why it happened, we talked about the risks, we talked about fixing it, and we agreed a plan on lane discipline, and so off we went. To get back to that crossroad, traffic was slow again, but again, we discussed things on the way there, so that there was no silence, and that crossroad went well. But then there was a big roundabout, and it was a two-lane roundabout. It was a multi-lane roundabout, and the left lane turned left. We are in the left, Reem says. So Reem and her pupil are in the left lane. The middle lane has to go ahead. So Reem and her pupil turn left onto a slip road that is going to be joining a dual carriageway. However, the vehicle that is in the middle lane, that's supposed to be going ahead, also follows Reem and her pupil round to the left. Now, the slip road has two lanes. Reem and her pupil are in the left lane, and the vehicle from the middle, who was supposed to be going ahead, has followed us round and is now in the right-hand lane of this slip road approaching the dual carriageway. Reem says, we're going down the slip road. Slip road has two lanes, with both approaching to join this dual carriageway. Reem and her pupil were in the left-hand lane, and the car that went from the middle lane is now in the right-hand lane of the slip road. And Reem says in brackets, this is where everything went wrong. Both cars accelerating at the same time reached the end of the slip road, nearly hitting each other, in brackets, extremely scary. Reem says, my focus was on my learner, not changing lanes with the car approaching too fast, so I made her aware of the car on her right, and I continued to focus on the car, when I should have realized that my learner is also accelerating and also contributing to the situation. I then realized that we were in a racing match. It was a racing match on who's getting to the finish line first, so I started telling her repeatedly to slow down, but she was fixated on the road ahead, and she didn't even hear me. I thought of using my dual controls, but another car was close behind, and I got scared of using my brakes and then causing the car behind to potentially hit us. So I reached for the steering wheel and steered away while raising my voice, telling her to slow down. It was a near-miss incident, and a dangerous situation, and I could have prevented it if I had focused on the learner as well as, or not just, on the vehicle next to us. Ream says, all of this happened in a matter of seconds. I'm just trying to decipher what we're saying here. Sorry, 1 second. If she'd focused on the learner and not just the vehicle, she should have prompted her pupil more clearly and told her to get off the accelerator and basically realign to a more appropriate position, not side by side another vehicle accelerating towards the end of the slip road. It all happened in a few seconds, as Ream has said. She said that we couldn't discuss this as there wasn't really an opportunity. We were now on a dual carriageway, and the dual carriageway was 3 minutes from the test centre. So the only opportunity that Ream had to discuss this was back at the test centre. Got back to the test centre, discussed the seriousness and the fatal risks, as well as the other options that we had in that moment, offered her debrief, and then basically said that the next lesson, this is going to be the number one focus. So that is Ream's feedback. Essentially, we started with a meeting and clearance situation. We found ourselves on a roundabout, heading back to the test centre, turning left at the roundabout onto a slip road that's going to take us onto a dual carriageway. Unexpectedly, another vehicle from another lane has followed us round onto that slip road, and we are now side by side, another road user on a slip road heading towards a dual carriageway. We are both accelerating at the same point, and we are both arriving at the end of that slip road at the same point, and now it's a problem. Now we're in a dangerous situation, potentially fatal, as Ream has said. Everything happened very quickly, as it tends to do on a slip road or any high-speed road, and we were too late, essentially, in dealing with this situation. We only took action when it had become imminently dangerous, not earlier, not before it became immediately dangerous. And that kind of took us to the end of the session. So that's an overview of Ream's feedback. I had to stop recording there for a moment because I had a session that was beginning. But now, in our new environment, we're going to finish this fail focus. I spoke to you about Ream's feedback on her own session. Now I want to talk to you about what the examiner has had to say about the same session. So here's what the examiner said. Ream has a pleasant and friendly personality and has built a good rapport with her pupil. Ream comes across as supportive and encouraging, and for the most part, some improvements took place when revisiting the multi-lane traffic lights at the crossroad. However, Ream was slow to intervene on the slip road, causing a situation to develop into a dangerous fault and a near miss with the vehicle alongside us. Had Ream have prompted as requested by her pupil, then we could have prevented this situation from escalating. So, let's talk about that. The feedback here is actually fairly straightforward, and Ream, the good news here is that there's only really one thing that examiner has highlighted as the reason that you've had an unsuccessful test. Now that's positive. I haven't looked at the scores yet. We'll look at them in a moment. But to look at that feedback, that tells me that for the most part, the examiner was satisfied with what they were seeing. There was evidence of progress. Unfortunately, for that one moment that you described was right towards the end of the test, we've allowed this situation to develop into a safety critical situation. And if it weren't for that, the examiner, for the most part, was fairly happy. And so when I read that feedback, I actually thought to myself, well, if I was to look at those words that the examiner has provided us, I'm guessing that there's not going to be too many competencies that are going to be scored really, really low. But let's have a look and see what the examiner has said so that we can get to the bottom line. So, for those of you who don't know, the 17 competencies are broken down into 3 categories. Those categories are lesson planning, risk management, and teaching and learning strategies. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to look at the competencies that we have been given, look for the areas with which we've scored poorly, that's 0s or 1s, and I'm also going to look at the risk management. And we're going to try and see what the examiner felt overall in line with Ream's feedback as well as the examiner's feedback. So we're going to start with lesson planning. Mainly 2s. Okay, so Ream scored 1 on did the trainer identify the learning goals and needs? Did the trainer identify the pupil's learning goals and needs? Now that's unfortunate, really, because the examiner has actually stated in their feedback that progress was made, but clearly they have felt that there has been an inability to identify broader, bigger picture needs, and that's probably, for the most part, down to that safety critical moment, i.e., the pupil needed and requested prompted instruction. Now, you, Ream, and the examiner have both made that point, that the pupil requested prompted instruction, and it sounds like what's happened there was in that slip road. It's kind of like the deer in the headlights. The pupil froze. Ream, you said that yourself. She kind of just started blocking you out, and you were saying things to her and she wasn't listening, but you did the same. And it sounds like for a period of time before you eventually took control and took charge, that you were not showing ability to identify the pupil's needs in that moment and then meet them. I suspect that it was, for the most part, that 1 has been influenced by that moment. Other than that, in lesson planning, we got 2s. We got 2s in, was the agreed lesson structure appropriate for the pupil's experience and ability? Were practice areas suitable? Was the lesson plan adapted when appropriate to help the pupil work towards their learning goals? We got 2s there. So, as far as lesson planning goes, we can see from the examiner's feedback and the scores given that this wasn't a terrible lesson plan, Ream. In fact, it sounds like the examiner, for the most part, was happy with what you were doing. But for that moment. Risk management. This is where it's gone wrong. We scored a 6 in risk management. And for those of you who don't know, you have to achieve a minimum score overall on your Part 3 test. But also, as many of you watching will know, you also, as well as the overall minimum score, you have to score a minimum, you have to get a minimum score within risk management. And unfortunately, Ream 6 does not meet the minimum score required for risk management. Why is risk management an entity in and of itself? Because you can plan for a lesson poorly and it doesn't necessarily have to be dangerous or illegal. And your teaching styles may not always marry up to the best way they could to the pupil's learning styles. But risk management is fundamental, and your inability to manage risk is imminently and directly dangerous. And so someone's inability to manage that risk will inevitably lead to an accident. And that's why risk management is, you can have a really good overall score, but if you don't have a minimum acceptable score with risk management, then you can still be unsuccessful. So let's talk about this. We got a 6 in risk management. Where did we get the 1s? To be honest, Ream scored 1s on every competency under risk management except for 1. So that is, did the trainer ensure that the pupil fully understood how responsibility for risk would be shared? Also, were directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and in good time? Also, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? Also, was any verbal or physical intervention by the trainer timely and appropriate? The only competency under risk management that we didn't get a 1 was a 2, and that was sufficient feedback given to help the pupil understand any potentially safety critical incidents. So, given this situation on the slip road, it makes sense to me why we've scored 1s where we have. Did the trainer ensure that the pupil fully understood how responsibility for risk would be shared? And were directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and in good time. I hope that it probably seems quite apparent to you, especially in word directions and instructions given to the pupil clear and good time. Reem, you've said it yourself in your feedback that by the time you took charge, it was just way too late. And I suspect that you can probably see, I hope that you can see how you've scored a 1 in these competencies. And it's the same with, was the trainer aware of surroundings and pupils' actions? So, Reem, when I read your feedback, immediately, this was the first competency that I knew we were going to score poorly on. Was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? So you said in your feedback that you weren't focusing on the pupil and the environment. You were just focusing on one of them, and that kind of that affected you. I think what you said was that you were aware of the car, but you were so focused on the environment around you, i.e. the car and the slip road, and we're running out of space. Running out of slip road rather, but you are failing then to acknowledge that your pupil was contributing to this scenario because they were also accelerating, and neither your pupil or the other road user were kind of moving their position away from one another. So this is the exact competency. It's the first competency I thought of when I read that in your feedback, because the trainer has to be aware of the surroundings environmentally outside the car, as well as the pupil's actions at any given moment. And Reem, I hope that you can see how failure to be on top of both can very rapidly and very seriously result in safety critical situations. You said all of this happened in a few seconds. And I believe you, because obviously we know how fast slip roads can be. We know how fast cars can be traveling on dual carriageways, and we know how quickly things can change. So as soon as I was reading your feedback, before I'd even looked at the scores, I knew that this was going to be a problem for you. We need to be aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions. And very commonly, do I see trainers who are unsuccessful. They're normally quite good at one of them, but not the other. They'll either watch the pupil really, really well, but fail to pay attention to what's going on around us, or vice versa. They're really good at watching the environment, but they're not watching the pupil enough. So please be aware, everybody who's watching this, that you've got to be on top of both, and that's difficult. And then, obviously, was any verbal or physical intervention by the trainer timely and appropriate, rather? Again, I hope that it should be very apparent to you guys all, Reem, when you said about by the time I'd kind of got on top of my own thoughts, we were towards the end of the slip road, and by that point you didn't feel like you could brake because there was a car behind you and you were running out of space, and we're still side by side with this car, and it's not timely and it's not appropriate, and that's kind of where it's gone wrong. So we got a 6 overall in risk management. So from this point on, it doesn't matter what overall score you get, Reem. If we're scoring a 6 in risk management, as you all know, that's what's going to go wrong. And it actually says at the top of your test report, risk management fail. It doesn't just say fail, it says risk management fail. Now, teaching and learning strategies. Before I go any further, I think it's really a shame. I hope you don't mind me saying, Reem, because when I look at lesson planning, you only scored a 1 in one of the competencies. And when I look at teaching and learning strategies, you've got loads of 2s. You've got a 3, and there's only 2 competencies that you scored a 1 on. So for the most part, you have actually, across the 17 competencies, you've got quite a lot of 2s. And if you're hitting 2s, for the most part, that should set you up really nicely. If you've got mainly 2s and a couple of 3s, then you're going to pass. You've mainly got 2s. But in teaching and learning strategies and lesson planning, when we look at risk management, it's almost exclusively 1. And so I'm saying that because actually what I want to highlight to you is that for the most part, it seems very apparent based on these scores, excuse me, that the examiner is happy with what you're doing. So when we look at teaching and learning strategies, we scored 2s and 3s in every competency except for 2 of them, and that is Was the teaching style suited to the pupil's learning style and current ability? And were opportunities and examples used to clarify learning outcomes? So I'm just gonna, I think I've kind of made my point in that it's the risk management. It's this safety critical incident, and it's so painful because it's happened right at the end by the sounds of it. But all I will say is this: there's a lot of hope in this fail focus, okay? Sometimes I look at people's unsuccessful attempts and the examiner almost can't fit in everything they want to say in their feedback because they don't have a big box to write in. And sometimes it's almost like, gosh, there's a lot to work on here. But in this case, it actually sounds like, as I've said many times, the examiner for the most part is quite satisfied with what you're doing and what's been going on and what they're seeing. It's just that safety critical situation right at the end. And I'll say this, any instructor who has taken a dozen pupils to test will know that there is no guarantees, and you have not passed until that test is complete and finished, and the examiner says that's the end of the test. And I hope that for all of you watching, this will be a reminder to you. Doesn't matter how good you think you've done, how well it's gone, how on top of everything you think you've been, you've got to stay on it, and you've got to stay in the moment right up until everything is finished. So what are my kind of main points? There's a couple of things that I wanted to say. The main thing that I would say is that, Reem, it's a real shame that this has happened, but it did happen, and I'm glad it happened here the way it did, in a way that you can now go and practice and improve on, because the fact that it did happen does show that there are certain situations, as rare as they may be, and I'm sure that it wouldn't happen again, I hope that it wouldn't, but it does show that there are certain situations where you could improve in terms of being on top of everything. I hope, and I want to believe that you have already learned a lot from that situation. But I will say this: when I am teaching my learners about anything to do with high-speed driving, one of the first conversations I have with them is how different the timing is. So when I have a pupil who is new, I'm always talking about planning ahead, starting early, giving yourself enough time to think and process and prepare and plan. And I say that to my learners. And then when I'm training instructors, I say the same thing to them. You need to be well ahead of the game. You need to be well timed, and you need to be ahead of the curve, because you need to be able to think about what's going on ahead, process, coach, then give your pupil enough time to then do all the things that they need. And that's difficult at 30 miles an hour when you're new to the industry. But then put yourself on a slip road or any kind of high-speed road, you have to double down, you have to triple down. Things need to be so much earlier, and you need to be so much further down the line. You need to be looking at the horizon and planning for what's happening on the horizon way back when. Do you know what I mean? And so I don't know whether it was a one-off. I don't know whether it was because of the nature of the environment that caught you off guard. I don't know whether it's because maybe some people feel like they are enjoying certain aspects of teaching, and other trainers don't enjoy certain aspects. And sometimes people love teaching high-speed driving, and other times trainers really don't. It may or may not be the case in your case that you do or don't like teaching high-speed roads or slip roads, but whatever the case may be, I know this: that situation would probably not have been as bad as it was if it wasn't so fast. And so that tells me that you, as a trainer, need to ensure that when you are doing anything on high-speed roads, you are so much further ahead of yourself mentally. You need to be so early, and you need to be coaching your pupil so that they can do the things that they need to do way earlier than they normally would. So when you are traveling at speed, you need to be ahead of the game. You need to be on top of things because, as you've already said, Reem, things can rapidly change in a matter of seconds. And you can go from feeling like you're in control to having a really scary moment, as you described. And I'm sorry that that situation happened, but I'm glad that it was okay in the end. And I'm hopeful that you can have learnt from that. Please, all of you know, whatever stage you're at in your journey, whether you've started teaching or not, whether you've got to a point where you've been teaching high-speed roads or not, whether you've taught slip roads or not, when we're doing anything that involves more speed, you must be so much earlier in everything you do than you normally would be, okay? Most PDIs do not start coaching and delivering directions and instructions early enough when they're very new to the role, okay? At 20 miles an hour, at 30 miles an hour, most PDIs need to learn how early they need to give directions and instructions because it's surprisingly early. It requires so much time. The pupil needs to be able to hear you, process what you've said, think about their procedures and responsibilities, and then implement, and then they'll do it wrong, and then you need to coach that thing wrong, and then they need to do it right. How much time does that take? Yeah. So most PDIs need to learn just how early they need to be with their directions and instructions and their coaching, and that's on 20 and 30 roads. Now think how much earlier even then you need to be when you're traveling at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. So that would be kind of my specific advice in relation to what's happened here, Reem, in your case. But I also broadly want to just mention to everyone, all of you, that this industry this is one of those industries where things can change very rapidly. And we as trainers have to be on the ball from start to finish, because it takes seconds for a situation to descend from what feels like quite a comfortable environment to very dangerous and sometimes fatal. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, Reem, in this case, you've been a victim of exactly that. But please know that the good news is nothing bad happened, and we can improve from it. And I hope for all of your sake, everybody who was watching this, you can take a lot from this. This is a really important message. And there will be some people who haven't yet got to the point where they've started teaching yet, and there'll be some people who haven't got to the point where they started teaching high-speed driving. I hope from watching this Fail Focus that you can all see just how quickly things can change, and just how on the ball you need to be, how far ahead you need to be, and how important and essential it is to stay on top of things, not just so that you can pass your Part 3, but on a more serious level, so that you are safe and so that the worst doesn't happen. So I hope that that helps. I hope that that has given you all something to think about. Reem, it sounds like you've got a lot of good natural stuff going on. I'd love to kind of speak to you more and build from there, and hopefully next time round you'll be looking at an ADI badge rather than a Fail Focus. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon.